The Velshera did not have a word for regret. They had 37 words for miscalculation. They had 11 words for structural inefficiency. They had a deeply philosophical term, doravash, which roughly translated to the moment when a decision reveals its flaw. But regret, as a feeling that lived in the body, that pressed against the chest cavity like something physical and unmoving, no. That concept had never made it into their language. Elder Counselor Maventoth stood before the archive wall in the Hall of Recorded Catastrophes on the third moon of Velshar Prime and read the oldest warning in the known galaxy for what she estimated was the 400th time in her 6th-century life. The warning was not written in Velshara script. It was not written in the language currently spoken by any living civilization. It was carved, physically carved, which itself was unusual because most galactic civilizations had moved beyond physical inscription approximately 8,000 years ago, a slab of compressed neutronite that had been found drifting in what was now called the Boundary Corridor. The slab was older than the Velshara star system, older than most of the civilizations that currently sat on the galactic accord. Its age had been measured 17 times using 17 different methods, and every single measurement came back with a number that made the scientists who performed the calculation sit very quietly for a long time afterward. The inscription read, "We found them by accident. We struck them because we could. We believed their silence was weakness. We believed their stillness was surrender. We did not understand that they were simply watching. When they came for us, they did not come quickly. They did not come with rage. They came with patience, which is far worse. They came with memory, which is worse still. They did not destroy our ships. They destroyed our idea of safety. We write this so that others might avoid the same miscalculation. Do not strike the ones who bleed slowly. The ones who bleed slowly always come back." There was no signature. There was no civilization name. There was no date, because whatever calendar system the writers had used had not survived them. Maventoth pressed one of her 4 upper limbs against the slab and felt the carved grooves beneath her sensory pads. She had been doing this for 6 centuries. The grooves never changed. The warning never changed. And yet, every time she read it, she felt something she did not have a word for either. Something adjacent to Dorovish. Something that said, "This will matter soon." She turned away from the wall and walked through the Hall of Recorded Catastrophes, past 17 other warnings from 17 other civilizations, all of them found in various states of preservation, all of them referencing, in different languages, using different metaphors, and describing different specific events, the same general subject. A species, unnamed in every record, described differently in each account. The pale ones, the fast-dying, the grief carriers, the ones who return, the remembers. Each civilization that had left a warning had used a different descriptor, which told Maventoth that none of them had ever successfully made contact and suffered the consequence. She stopped at warning number 11, which was her second favorite because of its unusual poetry. It had been left by the Dorothi, an insectoid hive mind civilization that had collapsed approximately 3,000 years ago for reasons unrelated to the unnamed species. Their warning read, "They are not the strongest beings in the galaxy. They are not the fastest. They are not the most intelligent by any measurement we have used. What they are is unreasonable. They do not accept loss the way reasonable creatures do. They do not process defeat the way defeat is meant to be processed. When a reasonable being is outmatched, it recalculates. It retreats. It finds a new equilibrium. These creatures do not find equilibrium. They find you." Maventoth had spent decades trying to determine whether unreasonable was a criticism or a compliment in the original Dorothi language. She had eventually concluded that it was neither. It was a category, a classification system that placed this unnamed species in a group entirely by themselves, things that do not behave according to the rules that govern things. She exited the Hall of Recorded Catastrophes and walked into the main corridor of the Velshara Grand Council building, where Subcommander Redisval was waiting for her with the expression he wore when he had news that he expected her to dislike. Redisval was young, barely 140 years old, and he had the particular energy of someone who had studied history academically but had not yet been required to live inside its consequences. He was competent. He was ambitious. He was, in Maven Totha's measured assessment, exactly the kind of person who read the warnings in the hall of recorded catastrophes and thought, but surely that does not apply to us. Elder Counselor, he said, falling into step beside her. The Third Expansion Fleet has filed its action report from the Outer Rim territories. And Commander Drevislon has flagged a border system. Low-technology civilization. Class 4 development level. Single inhabited planet. Primitive space travel. They've only colonized 2 neighboring moons, and the colonies are small. No military presence in the outer system. Maven Toth kept walking. What action did Commander Drevislon take? Redis Vol hesitated. The hesitation lasted exactly long enough for Maven Toth to feel Doravash begin spreading through her chest like cold fluid. He authorized a territorial claim strike on one of the moons, Redis Vol said. The smaller one. It was unmanned at the time of the strike. He's filed for expansion rights under Protocol 7. Was the moon unmanned at the time of the strike? Maven Toth said. Or was it unmanned because they evacuated it when they detected us coming? Another hesitation. Longer this time. The report does not specify, Redis Vol said. Maven Toth stopped walking. She turned and looked at her subcommander with the particular stillness that her staff had learned. Over decades of working with her meant that she was choosing her words with the care of someone defusing something. What, she said carefully, was the name of the species in this border system? Redis Vol pulled up his data slate. They call themselves, the translation is approximate, humans. Their planet is called Earth. Their star system is called. Maven Toth was already walking back toward the Hall of Recorded Catastrophes. Redis Vol had to jog to keep up with her. Elder Counselor, the action report requires a response by. Get me every intelligence file we have on the species called humans, she said. Get me every scout report from the Outer Rim territories for the past 200 years. Get me the original sensor logs from Commander Drevislon's approach to that moon. And then, she paused at the entrance to the hall. Get me, Commander Drevislon, on a live comm link. Because I need to tell him something before the humans do. She stepped back inside. She walked directly to the oldest warning sign. The one carved in Nitronite. The one left by a civilization with no name and no surviving descendants. She read it again. They came with patience, which is far worse. They came with memory, which is worse still. Somewhere, approximately 600 light-years away, on a pale blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, something had just been set in motion. Maven Toth did not have a word for regret, but she was beginning to understand, at a cellular level, why some civilizations needed one. Commander Sarah Voss had been mapping dead stars for 11 years when the news arrived that someone had destroyed her mother's research station. She was 300 million kilometers from anywhere interesting, in the outer belt of the Kepler 442 system, running passive scans on a brown dwarf that everyone at the cartography division had agreed was about as exciting as watching paint dry in a vacuum, when her comm system lit up with a priority red transmission from Earth Central Command. She read it twice. Then she sat in her pilot's chair for approximately 4 minutes, without moving. Her co-pilot, a compact, relentlessly cheerful man named Diego Reyes, who had been her navigator for 6 of her 11 years in deep space cartography, watched her read the message, and then watched her not move for 4 minutes, and wisely chose to say nothing. Diego had grown up in a family of 8 siblings and had developed, through sheer survival necessity, an extremely accurate sense of when silence was required. This was a silence-required moment. Sarah set down the data pad. They hit Phobos Station, she said. Secondary research installation. My mother's team was there 6 weeks ago, but they'd rotated out. She paused. The station's gone. Not damaged. Gone. They didn't leave debris. They just erased it. Who? Diego said, because the silence had clearly ended. Unknown vessels. The early intelligence reports are using the word Velshera, but I don't know what that means yet. She picked up the data pad again. Earth Central is recalling all outer system assets. We're being pulled back. Diego nodded slowly. So we go home. We go home, Sarah agreed. She began the calculations for the return burn. Her hands moved across the navigation console with the automatic efficiency of someone who had spent 11 years in situations where the math had to be right or you died, and she performed this calculation with the same mechanical precision she always did, and Diego watched her hands and noted that they were perfectly steady, which he had learned over 6 years meant that Sarah Voss was not feeling nothing. She was feeling something so large that her body had quietly decided to pretend it didn't exist until she was ready to deal with it. The brown dwarf drifted on their screens. Unremarkable. Cold. A thing that had tried to be a star and hadn't quite made it. Sarah looked at it for a moment before turning the ship around. "Pull everything we have on Velshera in the database," she said. "I want to know what we're dealing with before we get home." Diego pulled it up. The database file was thin. Outer rim observations only. Few grainy sensor images. Some acoustic analysis of their communication frequencies. A single linguistic analysis had produced maybe 40 words of approximate translation before the analyst had noted, at the bottom of the report, that the language structure was so fundamentally different from any human language family that direct translation might be functionally impossible. "They're big," Diego said, reading. 6 limbs. 4 upper, 2 lower. Apparently, they're about 600 years old as a spacefaring civilization. They've got... He scrolled. A lot of territory. Elder Council governance structure. Expansion-based economy. He paused. There's a note here from a xenosociology team. The note was filed approximately 3 years ago. It says, he stopped. Diego. It says, and I'm quoting directly here, recommend increased monitoring of Velshera expansion patterns. Trajectory modeling suggests outer rim human installations may fall within their projected expansion corridor within a decade. Recommend diplomatic contact be initiated. He set down the data pad. Recommend diplomatic contact. Initiated, Sarah said. Before now. The silence came back for a moment. It was not the large, careful silence that had been present before. A smaller, sharper one. How long ago was that filed? Sarah asked. 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days. Sarah said nothing. She ran the return burn calculations a second time, not because they were wrong, but because she needed something precise to do with her hands, and when the numbers came back identical to the first calculation, because the math did not care about anything except the math, she filed the course correction with Earth Central and leaned back in her chair and looked at the stars. She had a particular way of looking at stars that Diego had noticed years ago and never mentioned. Most people looked at the stars with a kind of expansive, romantic looseness, letting their eyes go soft, taking in the whole field. Sarah looked at individual stars, one at a time, like she was counting them, like she was making sure they were all still there. He had asked her about it once, early in their partnership. She had thought about it for a long time before answering. My mother is a cartographer, she'd said. She named things. That was her job, going to unnamed places and giving them names so that other people could find them afterward. She always told me the most important thing about a map is not accuracy. It's memory. A map is how you remember where things were, so you can find your way back or find your way to something new. I look at individual stars because I want to remember which ones I've seen. I don't want to just see a field of light. I want to know each one. Diego thought about that conversation now, watching Sarah count stars on the way home. He thought, whoever just erased a research station in the orbit of Mars has no idea what kind of person they just gave a reason to pay attention. He thought, I hope they are very, very ready. But he didn't say any of that. Instead, he pulled up the navigation charts for the return journey and began calculating optimal burn windows, because that was what was needed right now, and Diego Reyes was, above almost everything else, a practical man. 12 days to Earth, he said. 11, Sarah said, if we push the drive. We'll push the drive, Diego agreed. They turned toward home at a speed that the brown dwarf, drifting in the dark behind them, could not have understood and would not have cared about, being a brown dwarf, which is the universe's way of reminding you that most things do not notice you at all, and the things that do notice you are the ones worth paying attention to. The Velshera Grand Council met in emergency session 7 days after the Phobos strike, which was what everyone was calling it now, the Phobos strike, capitals included, as if naming it formally might help them understand it better. The council chamber was a massive circular room on Velshar Prime whose architecture had been specifically designed to make the beings inside it feel small relative to the decisions they were making. Every wall was transparent plasticine, offering a panoramic view of the gas giant that Velshar Prime orbited, with its 3 visible moons and the thin silver arc of its ring system hanging in the dark. Maven Toth had always found this architectural choice ironic, since most counselors spent most sessions staring at their data slates. She stood at the center of the chamber now, because she had requested speaking rights, and when a 600-year-old elder counselor requested speaking rights in an emergency session, the procedural tradition was to let her speak first. Around her, in tiered seating arranged in concentric circles, sat 47 other counselors, representing the 11 primary Velshara territories. Commander Drevislon, young, broad-limbed, currently experiencing what Maven Toth privately categorized as the specific discomfort of someone who believed they did something correct and is only now beginning to doubt that assessment, sat in the command representative's tier with his arms folded across his primary chest plate. "I will be direct," Maven Toth said, because she was 600 years old and had earned the right to skip the preamble. The Phobos strike was a mistake. Drevislon unfolded his arms. It was a legal territorial claim under. "It was a legal mistake," Maven Toth said, and the chamber was quiet. The procedure was followed correctly. The protocol was applied appropriately. The action was, by every technical measure, within our rights under the expansion policy. She paused. "It was still a mistake. And I will explain to this council exactly why, and then I will explain what I believe we should do about it, and then this council will make a decision, and I will record for the archive my formal prediction of the consequences of each possible decision, so that in 100 years, or 50, or 20, when this council's successors read the record, they will know that someone in this room understood what was coming." Drevislon's expression shifted. "Elder Counselor, with respect, you're describing a Class 4 civilization. They have 2 moon colonies. They have 17 warnings written about them," Maven Toth said. The chamber went quiet in a different way. 17 separate warnings, she continued, from 17 separate civilizations spanning approximately 12,000 years of recorded galactic history, none of which currently exist.
None.
Of the 17 species who left warnings about this species, warnings specifically about the consequences of striking them, not one has survived to the present day. She let that sit for a moment. "I am not suggesting causation in every case. Many of those civilizations fell for unrelated reasons. But the statistical pattern of not surviving the encounter with the ones who return is, I would argue, relevant context for our current situation." "They're Class 4, Drevislon said again, but quieter now. "The Dorothi were Class 7 when they encountered them," Maven Toth said. "The Senyavath was Class 8. The Orith Collective was a Class 9 multi-system civilization with a military fleet that outnumbered anything we currently possess." She looked at him steadily. "Class designation measures current capability. It does not measure trajectory. It does not measure will. It does not measure the thing that every single warning in the Hall of Recorded Catastrophes describes in different words, but the same essential concept. These creatures do not stop." Silence. The gas giant hung in the transparent walls, indifferent. "What do you recommend?" said Councillor Fethmora, the eldest member of the Trade Territories delegation, who had the useful quality of being genuinely willing to ask the question everyone else was thinking. "Immediate, direct diplomatic contact," Maven Toth said. "Open channel. No intermediaries. No protocol delays. We contact their central governing body directly. We acknowledge the strike. We offer full territorial withdrawal from the Phobos zone, and we begin formal negotiations for a recognized boundary." "That is an unprecedented concession for a first contact," someone began. "This is not a first contact," Maven Toth said flatly. "We destroyed their property. That is not a first contact. That is the beginning of something else entirely, and whether that something else becomes a diplomatic process or a different kind of process depends completely on what we do in the next 30 days. Drevislon stood. He was, Maven Toth noted, attempting to reclaim authority in the room through physical size, which was a young person's instinct and an old person's known quantity. "Elder Counselor," he said, With the greatest respect for your historical knowledge, history is not destiny. We're talking about a species that still uses chemical propellant rockets for portions of their inner system transit. They have no FTL capability. Their most advanced weapon platform is a railgun-based satellite network around their home planet. They cannot reach us. They cannot threaten us. They cannot. Commander Drevislon, Maven Toth said quietly. May I ask you something? He paused. Of course. When you approached Phobos Station before the strike, did your tactical team note anything unusual about the moon's surface readings? He frowned slightly. There was some anomalous thermal data. Probably geological. Your tactical team flagged it as probably geological? The confidence rating was, he stopped. What was the confidence rating, Commander? A pause. 61%. 61% geological, Maven Toth said. 39% unknown. And your team proceeded because the station was listed as unmanned in the intelligence files. She folded her upper limbs. I reviewed the original sensor logs last night. The anomalous thermal readings were consistent with the pattern signature of a concealed observation array. Not a weapon. Not a colony. An observation array. Someone on that moon was watching you approach. Commander. They watched you destroy the station. They watched you leave. She let the silence develop fully before continuing. They were not there by accident. And they were not there to stop you. She looked around the chamber. They were there to see you. To record you. To know your approach vectors, your weapon yields, your ship configurations, and your protocols. She turned back to Drevislon. Does that sound like a Class 4 civilization that cannot threaten us? Or does that sound like a Class 4 civilization that is currently in the process of deciding whether it wants to? No one spoke. The gas giant drifted. Maven Toth sat down. I recommend diplomatic contact, she said again, into the silence. I recommend it urgently. And I recommend that whoever we send to make that contact understands, deeply in their bones, not academically, that we are not the ones with leverage in this negotiation. Whatever the capability gap currently says. Whatever the ratings suggest. She looked at her hands, 4 of them, resting on the council desk, older than most living Velshera. We are not the ones with leverage. Because leverage in a negotiation comes from being the one more willing to walk away. And we are dealing with a species that doesn't walk away. She looked up. They walk toward. The thing about 11 days of transit burn, Sarah had discovered over the years, was that they were either the most productive days of your life or the most destructive, depending on your psychological state at departure. On the good transits, the ones after a successful mapping run, or after a complicated scan resolved cleanly, or after a rare social event at some outer system installation where she'd actually enjoyed herself, 11 days felt like a gift. Time to read. Time to run through the ship's narrow corridors until her legs ached. Time to learn something new from the database or work on the cartographic notation system she'd been quietly revising for years because the official one had 3 significant inefficiencies that nobody else seemed bothered by. This was not a satisfactory transit. On the 3rd day out from Kepler, 442, she pulled everything Earth Central had released on the Velshera. Which was not much, but it was more than the database had offered earlier because the intelligence teams had clearly been working fast. She read it all in one sitting, cross-referencing against the xenosociology reports and the few first-hand accounts from Outer Rim survey teams who had spotted Velshera vessels at long range over the past decade. Then she read it again. Then she opened a new document on her personal tablet. Not the ship system, her personal tablet, the one that wasn't logged, and she started writing. Diego noticed she was writing on the personal tablet and did not ask what she was writing, because he had learned over 6 years which questions Sarah welcomed and which ones she would answer with a politeness so precise and closed that it was functionally a wall. He made coffee instead. The ship synthesizer made a version of coffee that was technically coffee in all nutritional respects and was psychologically unsatisfying in ways Diego had never been able to fully articulate, but which he felt deeply every morning. Can I ask something that's not about what you're writing? He said. Sarah looked up. Yes. Do you think your mother knew? About the Velshera expansion corridor? When she set up at Phobos Station, was it part of the monitoring program? Sarah was quiet for a moment. She's been doing xenocontact prep work for 30 years. Deep observation, non-interactive. She's been watching the Outer Rim since before most of the current intelligence teams were even formed. She paused. She knew something was out there. She didn't know it was going to move this fast. Did she know it was going to move at all? Yes, Sarah said. She knew. Diego drank his unsatisfying coffee. That's why she set up on Phobos. That's why she set up on Phobos. And the observation array? Sarah looked back at her tablet. That's her signature. She doesn't like being surprised. They sat with that for a while. Outside, the stars were doing what they do during a transit burn. Nothing. Space is very large, and even at considerable speed, the stars appear essentially stationary. This is one of the more psychologically disorienting aspects of deep space travel. The universe looks the same regardless of how fast you're moving through it, which can make you feel, on bad days, like you're not moving at all. On the 5th day, Sarah finished what she was writing on the personal tablet and sent it, encrypted, to an address Diego recognized as belonging to Commander Yoel Okafor at Earth's Central Strategic Analysis. On the 6th day, Commander Okafor replied. The reply was 2 sentences long. Diego didn't see the content, but he saw Sarah read it, and he saw her expression do something unusual, a specific kind of settling, like a mechanism clicking into place. On the 7th day, she started running more. Longer sessions. The ship's corridor was 40 meters from bow to stern, and she ran it in loops until Diego lost count, which said something because Diego had a very good count. On the 8th day, she came back from a run and said, without preamble, there are 17 warnings about humans in an alien archive on their 3rd moon. Diego, who had been running navigation calculations, turned around. How do you know that? Because my mother found a translated excerpt of one in the Outer Rim data 3 years ago and filed it with Xenosociology, and nobody did anything with it, and I found the file in the intelligence release. She sat down. Her hair was still damp from the run. The warnings are old. Multiple civilizations. All saying roughly the same thing. Which is? She looked at him. Her eyes were very calm, as they always were when she was working with something large and had decided to be precise about it. Don't hit us, she said. Because we remember. Diego thought about that. Are we going home to negotiate? He asked. Or, are we going home for something else? Both, Sarah said. Ideally. She picked up her personal tablet. Negotiations first. Because that's the right move. Because war is expensive, and people and the galaxy are big enough that 2 civilizations should be able to find a line without either of them having to cross it. And, if they don't want to negotiate? Sarah set the tablet down. Then we do what the warnings said we do, she said. We remember. And we go find them. Diego was quiet for a moment. I want it on the record, he said finally, that I think the negotiation option sounds great, and I fully support pursuing it enthusiastically. Noted. I'm just saying, as a general preference. Diego. Yeah. Make sure the navigation charts include the Velshar system. He looked at her. Just in case, she said. He turned back to his console and began pulling up the charts, because that was what was needed, and he was, above almost everything else, a practical man. And a practical man, when someone he trusts tells him to prepare for 2 possibilities, prepares for both. Dr. Iona Voss was 63 years old, had 17 research publications, and had named 41 stellar objects, 2 moons, and 1 small asteroid that she had privately named after her daughter, without filing the paperwork, because she knew Sarah would be embarrassed. She was also, currently, sitting in a sealed briefing room in Earth Central Command's underground facility in Geneva, drinking coffee that was only marginally better than ship synthesizer coffee, and being asked questions by a very young intelligence officer who had clearly read her file but had not fully absorbed what it said about how she responded to being managed. Dr. Voss, said the intelligence officer. His name was Holt, and he had the kind of precise, careful energy that Iona associated with people who had been told they were very smart and had decided that this meant they were the most prepared person in any room. We need to discuss the observation array on Phobos. We do, Iona agreed. You deployed it without official authorization from. I deployed it with authorization from the Outer Rim Monitoring Division, which exists specifically to authorize this type of. The array recorded the Velshera strike in complete detail, Holt said, including approach vectors, weapon yield data, drive signature analysis, and he looked at his data pad. And what appears to be 17 seconds of high-resolution visual data about the strike itself. 18 points in 4 seconds, Iona said. The array ran a second recording pass before losing power. Holt looked at her. The array survived the strike?
No.
It was destroyed approximately 4 seconds after the second pass completed. She sipped her coffee. I designed the transmission protocol to prioritize data relay over self-preservation. The array sent everything home before it was hit. A pause. You anticipated it would be hit. I anticipated that if anything capable of destroying Phobos Station arrived in the area, the array would not survive the encounter. She set down her coffee. I am a scientist. I plan for failure states. Holt was quiet for a moment. Then, you've been monitoring the Outer Rim for 30 years. 28 years in an official capacity. 31 years were spent privately before the program existed. For the Velshera specifically? Not specifically. For anything. The mathematics of expansion patterns in a multi-civilization galaxy suggest that contact events are not random. They cluster. They have precursor signatures. I've been watching for precursor signatures in the Outer Rim approach corridors for 31 years, Holt said. 31 years. He looked at his data pad again. Not reading it, she thought. Processing something. Dr. Voss, he said carefully, can I ask about the 17 warnings about humanity? The translated excerpt you filed 3 years ago with Xenosociology. You found it in Outer Rim data. Where, specifically? Iona looked at him. This is in my report. I know. I'd like to hear you describe it. She studied him for a moment. Then, deciding he was asking for a real reason and not a procedural one, she answered. Outer Rim survey drones collect broad-spectrum data on everything they encounter. Most of it is processed automatically and flagged by category. 3 years ago, one of my drones came back from a pass near the boundary corridor with an unusual data packet. Acoustic and visual scan of an object, a large, dense, artificial construction. Neutronite slab.
She paused.
The drone's imaging system got a clear scan of the inscribed surface. I ran the inscription through our linguistic analysis programs and achieved approximately 60% translation accuracy on the older sections, with higher accuracy on the more recent inscriptions. She folded her hands. The warnings referenced, in aggregate, a species matching human behavioral and physiological descriptions. Multiple civilizations. Multiple times. All warn against aggressive contact. And you filed it with Xenosociology. I did. And they flagged it for further analysis and took no action, Iona said. Yes. Holt was quiet. It's a common failure mode, Iona said, not unkindly. Organizations receive information that requires either urgent action or acknowledgement that previous decisions were incorrect, and they choose a third option, further study. Further study is how you avoid both acting and being wrong. It's also how you arrive at situations like the current one. She picked up her coffee again. I'm not criticizing your organization specifically. It's a human failure mode. Possibly a universal one. So, what do we do now? Holt asked, and Iona noted that the careful, managed precision of his earlier posture had shifted slightly. He was asking a genuine question, not a procedural one. Now, she said, we make contact. Immediately, before they decide they have more time than they do. She looked at him steadily. And we send someone who understands the situation fully. Not someone who's been given a briefing. Someone who's been inside this problem for years. Holt looked at his data pad. Then at her. Your daughter's transit burn arrives in 4 days. Yes, Iona said. She filed a strategy document with Commander Okafor 8 days ago. Did she? It's very detailed. Iona allowed herself a small, private expression that she kept facing away from Holt. She's a cartographer. She maps things before she moves through them. The strategy document proposes a contact framework that's unlike anything our diplomatic corps has used before. Sarah generally finds standard frameworks insufficient, Iona said. She gets that from her father. Holt set down his data pad. We want her on the first contact team. She'll say yes, Iona said. She's already said yes, I imagine, just not to anyone officially yet. How can you? Because she sent a NAV chart request to Diego Reyes that included the Velshar system, Iona said. And Sarah doesn't chart things she doesn't intend to go to. She stood, indicating that she considered this portion of the briefing concluded. One more thing, Dr. Voss, Holt said. The document. The strategy document Sarah sent. There's a line in it that I've been thinking about. He picked up the data pad. She wrote, the goal of this contact is not to demonstrate strength or establish dominance. The goal is to make the Velshara understand something true about us. Not what we can do, but what we will do. And the difference between those two things is the entire negotiation. He looked up.
What did she mean by that?
Iona considered the question for a moment. She meant, she said finally, that capability is a number. Will is a different kind of thing entirely. You can measure the first. You can only recognize the second. She walked to the door. The Velshara know our numbers. They don't know what we're willing to do. She paused at the threshold. The job of the first contact team is to show them, without actually doing it. She looked back. That's the whole trick, Mr. Holt. Show them the edge without going over it. Make the edge visible enough that they believe it's real. Because it is real, and they need to understand that before anyone does something that makes the numbers irrelevant. She left. Holt sat in the briefing room for a long time afterward, looking at the line in the document. What we will do. And the difference between those two things is the entire negotiation. He thought. She learned that from her mother. He thought, we are very lucky, given everything, that these particular people exist in this particular moment. He submitted a proposal to grant Sarah Voss complete operational control over the contact mission. He filed it for the first time in his career, without requiring a second review. They met in the dark. This was Sarah's choice, and it had taken her 2 days to convince the Earth's central diplomatic team that it was the right choice and 3 hours to explain the reasoning to the team's official lead, Ambassador Renata Childs, a career diplomat who was broadly excellent at her job and had the particular quality of being genuinely open to being convinced, which Sarah appreciated more than almost any other professional trait. The reasoning was this: meeting in a neutral vessel in open space, with no home territory visible on either side, with no flags or insignia beyond functional identification, with the lights of neither civilization framing the encounter. This removed the visual language of dominance. Sarah observed that every initial interaction, even if unintentionally, conveyed hierarchy. Someone's ship was bigger. Someone's delegation wore more decorative clothing. Someone's technology glittered more impressively. And all of that was information, yes, but it was the wrong information for this specific moment. For this moment, Sarah wanted the information to be, we are here. We chose to be here. We are not afraid of the dark. The ship they used was a mid-sized survey vessel, not a warship, not a diplomatic cruiser, but a working science ship with clean lines and visible sensor arrays and the functional, undecorated look of something built for purpose rather than impression. Sarah had stripped the exterior of anything that could be read as ceremonial. She wanted the Velshara to see a vessel that was simply and completely present. The Velshara arrived 12 minutes before the scheduled window. Sarah noted this and said nothing about it to the rest of the team, but filed it in the running analysis she'd been keeping since departure. Early arrival was information. Early arrival by 12 minutes. Not 30, not 5, but 12, which was early enough to signal eagerness, but not early enough to suggest impatience, was a specific kind of information. It suggested that whoever had planned their approach had thought carefully about the signal that timing would send. That was intriguing. That meant someone on the Velshara side was also thinking about this as a communication problem, not just a protocol event. The comm link opened. Ambassador Childs was, technically, the first human to speak in an official first contact with the Velshara. She had prepared a statement. It was good, Sarah had read it, and it was careful and considered and diplomatically sound. It acknowledged the Phobos strike without expressing anger. It expressed willingness for dialogue. It established foundational respect. It was a positive statement. The Velshara delegation leader, Counselor Maventoth, 600 years old, who had apparently insisted on leading the delegation personally in a move that had reportedly caused significant disagreement within the Velshera Council, waited for the translation algorithm to complete its work and then responded. The translation came through 30 seconds later. This was faster than anyone had expected, which meant they had been working on the algorithm too. We acknowledge that we acted before we understood. This is a failing of youth, even in old civilizations. We came here to begin understanding. We have brought nothing but our willingness to listen, and we offer the present as the only appropriate opening for a conversation that should have happened before anything else did. Ambassador Childs looked at Sarah. Sarah was looking at the translated text on her screen. Youth, even in old civilizations. The Velshera had a 600-year spacefaring history. By their own framing, they were calling themselves young. Not relative to humanity, relative to the scale of what they'd just done. That was not a defensive statement. That was not a face-saving statement. That was a genuine acknowledgement framed in a way that revealed something about how they thought about culpability. Sarah leaned forward slightly and said, softly, to Ambassador Childs, "Tell her we appreciate the framing. Specifically that we appreciate it. She'll know what we mean." Childs nodded and worked the specific appreciation into her response, and when the translation came back, Maventotha's reply contained a phrase that the algorithm flagged as culturally significant, a Velshera term that apparently indicated the recognition of another mind operating with full awareness of subtext. Doravash, the algorithm noted, is approximately translated as the moment when the flaw in a decision becomes visible from inside. Used here as a compliment. Sarah sat back. Around her, the diplomatic team was doing what diplomatic teams do in these moments, taking notes, running analysis, and preparing talking points. All of it is necessary. All of it is important. She was doing something different. She was listening to the shape of the conversation underneath it. The one that wasn't in the words but was present in the rhythm, choice, and timing. The one that said, "We are both more afraid of getting this wrong than we are of each other." That was the conversation she needed to have. Not today. Not in this session, with its formal structures and its carefully prepared statements. But eventually, she made a note on her personal tablet, "Request a private session." Not official, just us. And below that, the old one. She's the one who understood. She's the one who brought herself here. And below that, because Sarah was a cartographer and cartographers noted everything, she read the warnings. She knows what we do. She came anyway.
Why?
She underlined the last word.
Why?
Because a being that had read 17 warnings about you and then crossed hundreds of light years to sit across from you in the dark was not a being that was acting from fear. Fear would have stayed home. Fear would have sent a proxy, nothing, or a weapon.
She came.
Sarah looked at the comm screen, at the translated words scrolling slowly, and thought, "Whoever you are, you're the most interesting person I've talked to in 11 years of deep space cartography." And that is saying something because most of the interesting things in deep space are stars, and I find them extremely interesting. Diego, sitting at the navigation console behind her, sent her a text on the ship's internal system. "You're doing the counting thing." She looked at the comm screen and realized she was, in fact, looking at each word of the Velshera transmission one at a time.
Precisely.
Individually. She sent back counting words instead of stars. "Feel free to note the irony." Diego sent back. Noted. "Also, are we doing okay?" She sent back. "Yeah. We're doing okay." And they were. On the third day of formal sessions, Maventoth requested a recess. This was unusual. The formal sessions were going well, better than Maventoth had privately expected, because the human delegation contained at least one member who was clearly operating at a level of contextual understanding that exceeded what their briefing materials could have provided, and this suggested, to her long-cultivated assessment instincts, that someone on the human side had been thinking about this specific situation for a very long time. She used the recess to ask, through the translation intermediaries, whether the human team's analytical lead would be willing to meet with her privately. The request came back approved in 4 minutes, which was its own answer. They met in a small compartment off the main conference space, a neutral room that neither delegation had used yet, that smelled of recycled air and the faint chemical tang of new construction, because the meeting vessel had been assembled specifically for this contact event and still had the ghost of its own manufacture about it. Maven Toth arrived first. She sat, her lower two limbs folded into the human standard chair in a way that was not entirely comfortable, because Velshera physiology and human furniture had not been designed for each other, and waited. Sarah Voss arrived 2 minutes later. She was younger than Maven Toth had expected. Most of the human delegation were older, career diplomats, strategic analysts, and senior command figures. This woman was younger and dressed in the functional clothing of a working scientist rather than a diplomat, and she came in without an aide or a recorder and sat directly across from Maven Toth without performing any of the entry protocols that the other humans had consistently used. She simply sat down and looked at Maven Toth with eyes that were doing what Maven Toth now recognized from 3 days of observation as that specific counting attention. "I read your archive," Sarah said. No preamble. The translation algorithm converted it. Maven Toth felt the words land. "Not the translation your team released to our intelligence services," Sarah continued. "The original. My mother found a fragment scanned 3 years ago. I read everything she sent me." "The neutronite slab," Maven Toth said. "Yes." Maven Toth was quiet for a moment. In 600 years of council work, she had encountered many kinds of negotiating postures. The direct opening, the deliberate bypassing of pleasantry and protocol, was usually either a dominance move or a trust move, and the difference was in the body, in the stillness of the person doing it. The result was a trust move. "Why did you want to meet privately?" Maven Toth asked. "The official sessions are necessary, but their structure makes certain things hard to say." "I wanted to say something hard." "Go ahead." Sarah looked at her hands for a moment. Then back up. "I need you to understand something about us that doesn't translate well through briefing documents and intelligence files. Something about why the warnings are true." She paused. "Not to threaten you. I want to be clear about that. I'm not here to threaten. I'm here because," she stopped. Searched for the right words. "If you do not understand this, even if we reach a perfectly reasonable agreement in the official sessions, you will eventually do something that breaks it. Not because you're malicious, because you don't understand the specific thing that makes us what we are." "Tell me," Maven Toth said. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then, "We are terrible at letting go." Silence. "Most species, the ones I've studied, the ones in your records, the ones that survived to develop galactic civilization, they have systems. Biological, cultural, and psychological systems for accepting loss. For releasing damage. For moving on. These systems evolved because they're adaptive. You can't build a civilization if you can't process grief and move forward."
She paused.
"We have those systems too.
Partially.
We can move on from most things. We can forgive an enormous amount. We are, genuinely, one of the more forgiving species in our own historical record." She looked at Maven Toth steadily. "But there are categories of loss that we don't process. That's something in us, deep, below rationality, below culture, refuses to release. And those categories are not what you would expect. They're not the biggest losses. They're not the most lethal events." She stopped. "What are they?" Maven Toth asked. "Witnessed injustice," Sarah said. "That's the core of it. When we see something that we believe should not have happened and we watch it happen anyway, and we're not able to stop it, that goes somewhere in us that does not heal. It does not metabolize. It stays." She pressed her hands flat on the table. Phobos Station was empty. Nobody died. In objective terms, it was a property loss. Militarily, strategically, it barely registers. She looked at Maven Toth. "But we watched you do it. We have the recording. We know exactly what happened, and we know that you knew we were watching, and we know that you did it anyway. And that," she paused, "that is the specific category." The silence in the small room was very full. "The warnings all say we come back," Sarah continued. "The warnings describe military force, fleet engagements, and civilizational conflicts. And we are capable of all of that. I want to be honest with you. We are capable of all of that." She looked down at her hands again. "But that's not actually why we come back. That's the method. The reason we come back is that we watched something happen that we believed should not have happened, and we are constitutionally incapable of deciding that it doesn't matter. She looked up. We are very bad at deciding that things don't matter. Maven Toth sat for a long moment. I've been trying to explain something to my council for 30 years, she said finally, and her translator rendered the words in Sarah's ears. Something that the warnings always gestured at but never quite articulated. The Dorothi called it unreasonable. The Senyavath called you the ones who do not recalculate. The text on the Nutronite slab said you came with patience and memory. She looked at Sarah. I always understood that these descriptions were pointing at something, but I never had the inside of it. The mechanism. She paused. Witnessed injustice. Yes. And the Phobos strike constitutes. Yes, Sarah said. It does. Maven Toth was quiet again. Then, what do we do about that? You can't undo it, Sarah said. That's not how we work. The recording exists. The event is in our memory now. You can't undo it.
She paused.
But there is something that sometimes, not always, not reliably, but sometimes, functions as a kind of counterweight. Which is? Sarah looked at her. When the party responsible acknowledges it. Specifically.
Completely.
Not as a diplomatic formality. Genuinely.
She paused.
When they say, we saw you watching, and we did it anyway, and that was wrong, and we understand that it was wrong not just procedurally, but in the specific way that you experience wrong. She paused again. That doesn't erase the recording, but it puts something next to it. And the something next to it is almost as important to us as the original event. She looked at Maven Toth with complete calm. Almost. Maven Toth understood. She understood at a level below language, at the level of 600 years of watching civilizations interact with each other and with their own failures. She understood that what Sarah was describing was not negotiating language. It was not a precondition or a demand. It was an explanation, offered genuinely, about the architecture of a species that she had read 17 warnings about, and still, until this moment, had not fully understood. I will address the full delegation tomorrow, Maven Toth said. Not as a diplomatic formality, as what it is. Sarah nodded. The words I use, Maven Toth said carefully. The acknowledgement. Do you have a language for it? A form that carries what you need it to carry. Sarah thought for a moment. Don't say you're sorry, she said. We're suspicious of sorry. It's too simple to say, without meaning it.
She paused.
Say you saw us watching.
Specifically that.
That you knew we were there, and you proceeded, and you understand that we know that you knew. She paused. The witness is the thing. If you acknowledge the witnessing, we know you understand what actually happened. Maven Toth sat with that for a long time. You are a strange species, she said finally. Yes, Sarah agreed. We know. I mean that with. The translator flagged a phrase. With the specific respect reserved for things that are strange because they understand themselves completely. A pause. Doravash, Maven Toth said. And then, in her own language, not waiting for translation, the word for something that reveals its own nature all at once. Sarah didn't know the word, but she watched Maven Toth's face, 4 eyes, the deep ochre color of late-stage stellar fusion, moving through something that in a human face Sarah would have called recognition, and she thought, yeah, we understand each other now. We understand each other now. Iona Voss watched the live feed from Earth Central's relay station in a small monitoring room in Geneva, with a cup of coffee she had stopped tasting approximately 40 minutes ago. She watched her daughter sit across from a 600-year-old alien counselor in a compartment the size of a storage unit, and she watched the conversation happen in translated fragments on the feed's subtitle track, and she felt something that she recognized and that she did not have a neat word for, a complex feeling, multi-layered, like a composite map where several different surveys have been laid on top of each other, and the total image is richer and more complicated than any single layer.
Proud.
She was proud, obviously. That was the top layer. But underneath it, something more complicated. Something that had to do with watching a person you formed, a person whose nature you contributed to in whatever proportional way parents contribute to the nature of children. Go out into a situation you prepared for but could not prepare them for, and do the right thing in the right way for the right reasons. And below that, something that was almost philosophical. Something about maps. It's about how you make a map of a place so that other people can find it, and then someone else uses your map to find a place you never knew existed, and the place they find is more interesting than anything on your original chart. Sarah had found something. In that small room. In that conversation. Iona could see it in the feed. The quality of the stillness between the two of them, the alien elder and her daughter, was the specific stillness of a conversation that has reached the thing it was actually about. Holt appeared in the doorway behind her. Dr. Voss. The ambassador's team is assembling for the evening debrief. Tell them I'll attend tomorrow, Iona said. A pause. Is there anything? She did it, Iona said. She found the inside of it. The mechanism. She didn't look away from the screen. The negotiation is going to hold now. Holt was quiet. How can you tell from? The stillness, Iona said. When two people in a room stop managing each other and start actually talking, there's a specific quality to the silence that comes out of it. Watch the feed. You can see it. She pointed at the subtitle track. See that pause? That's not a translation delay. Both of them are just sitting with something that was just said. Holt looked at the feed. The pause stretched to 12 seconds in the timestamp. Then 15. That's a long pause, he said. Yes, Iona said. That's a real conversation. She finally took a sip of her cold coffee. Go to the debrief, she said. Tell them. The private session produced something. We'll have more detail tomorrow. Tell them to prepare for a fundamentally different phase 2 than the one we planned for. Different how? Iona considered. The original phase 2 assumed we'd still be in boundary-setting mode, establishing parameters, demonstrating capability, and making sure the Velshera understood the cost of further incursion. She set down her coffee. But that conversation. She nodded at the screen. They're past that now. Both of them. They moved past that. She looked at Holt. Tell them we're moving to something harder. We're moving to the part where we actually have to trust each other. She turned back to the screen. On the feed, her daughter was looking at her hands. And the 600-year-old alien elder was looking at Sarah with the expression that Iona, even without knowing Velshera facial physiology, recognized instinctively as I see you. I understand what you are. And I am going to do the right thing with that understanding. She's good, Holt said, watching the feed. He wasn't talking about the alien. Yes, Iona said. She gets it from her father. A pause. You've said that twice now, Holt said carefully. She gets things from her father. I noticed it in the briefing room too. Iona was quiet for a moment. He was a very stubborn man, she said. He believed in things with his whole body. Not just his mind. His whole body. She looked at her coffee. He died on a research mission when Sarah was 9. Outer Systems Survey. Equipment failure. She was very still. Sarah remembers exactly where was she when we got the news? What she was wearing. What the light was doing. She has never once told me she got over it. A pause. She just got better at carrying it. She learned to move around it. But she never let go of it. She looked back at the screen. She doesn't let go of things. She never has. She pointed at the subtitle track. That's what she was telling the alien. That's the thing. She needed her to understand. Holt was quiet for a long time. We're lucky, he said finally, to have her in the room. Yes, Iona said. We are. Maven Toth stood before the full joint session. All 47 Velshera counselors on remote relay, the full human diplomatic delegation assembled in the conference space, and said what she had decided to say. She did not read from a document. She had written the words the night before, in the careful, precise language of a formal council address, and then she had deleted the document and decided to say it from the place where it actually lived, which was not a document. We came to the system you call soul with the understanding that we had rights under our own law, she said, and waited for the translation, and then continued. We acted on those rights. We destroyed property. We did this while watching what we had correctly identified as an observation system record our actions.
She paused.
We knew you were watching. We knew you were recording. We moved forward fully aware that we were under observation. The human delegation was very still. I am not addressing this as a legal matter, Maven Toth said. I am not offering a diplomatic formality. I am addressing it as the specific thing it was, an action taken in full view of the beings it affected, without their consent, in a space they had named and inhabited while they watched. She looked directly at the section of the room where Sarah Voss was sitting. You watched us do it. We knew you were watching. And we did it anyway. A long pause. That is what I am here to acknowledge. Not the property damage. This is not a border violation as an abstract legal concept. The specific thing, we were watched doing it and we should not have done it, and we understand, I am speaking for myself here but also for this delegation, and its intent, we understand that those are the exact terms in which you experienced it. The silence in the room was the kind that has weight. Ambassador Childs, who had been briefed on the private session and had understood its content with the rapid, precise instinct of a genuinely skilled diplomat, said, We hear you. We understand that you understand.
She paused.
We accept this acknowledgement as the genuine thing it is. And then, because she was also a genuinely skilled diplomat, and we would like to continue. The sessions ran for 8 more days. Sarah participated in most of the sessions, but she believed she had completed her most important work. She sat in the sessions and listened and contributed where her specific knowledge was useful, but the formal negotiation had its own momentum now. The careful, professional momentum of 2 delegations who have found the actual ground beneath the procedural surface and are now building something on it. On the 6th day, a junior Velshera delegate approached her during a break and, through the translation system, asked her a question that she had not anticipated. The warnings in our archive, the delegate said. He was young, barely 60 years old by Velshera reckoning, which made him approximately equivalent to a very precocious graduate student in Sarah's mental model. The ones from the civilizations that did not survive. I have been thinking about them during these sessions. He paused. The ones that wrote warnings, they survived long enough to write them. Which means the encounter with your species was not immediately lethal for them. Something else ended them. He looked at her carefully. But they chose to spend part of their remaining existence writing about you. About the specific warning, they wanted to leave.
He paused.
Why do you think they did that?
Sarah thought about it.
Because they wanted someone to avoid the same mistake, she said. Yes, the delegate said. But why? If their civilization was ending, if the encounter with your species had damaged them fatally, why spend the energy on a warning rather than on self-preservation? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Because that's what you do when you've learned something important, she said finally. You try to make sure the learning survives even when you don't. She paused. That's what my mother does. She maps things so the information exists even if she isn't there to remember it. The warning writers were cartographers. Of a sort. The delegate was quiet for a moment. The encoding on the neutronite slab, the oldest warning. Did you know it was encoded at the molecular level? The inscription is visible, but there is a secondary data layer embedded in the crystalline structure of the neutronite itself. He looked at her. Our scientists discovered it 30 years ago. We have not been able to decode it. Sarah was very still. It's been sitting in our archive, the delegate said. Undecoded. Molecularly encoded in neutronite by a civilization that no longer exists. He paused. I thought you should know. He searched for words. I thought the cartographer's daughter should know that there is something on the map that has not yet been read. Sarah looked at him for a long time. Thank you, she said. And then, because it was true, and because she meant it in the largest possible sense, thank you. 2 months after the contact sessions concluded, Iona Voss was on the 3rd moon of Velshar Prime. This was not what anyone had originally planned. The original plan was for a remote data transfer. The Velshera would transmit the molecular skin data from the neutronite slab's secondary layer, while Earth's decryption teams would attempt analysis, and everyone would wait a few years to see if anything useful emerged. This was the cautious plan. This was the plan that kept both parties at a comfortable distance while the formal relationship developed. Then Iona reviewed the scan specifications and realized that the molecular encoding technique was unlike anything in human or Velshera scientific literature, that remote analysis was probably not going to work, that she needed to be physically present with the original slab, and that she was, at 63 years old, still very capable of traveling 600 light-years if the data required it. She had also, somewhat to her surprise, been genuinely curious to see the archive. Maven Toth had arranged everything. The elder counselor had also, somewhat to Iona's surprise, personally met her at the transit terminal on Velshar Prime's third moon and walked with her through the installation and into the hall of recorded catastrophes. Iona had stood in the hall for a long time without moving or speaking. Not because she was being dramatic, because she needed time to absorb it properly. 17 warnings. 17 civilizations. The physical variety of the warning materials alone, carved stone, pressed metal, something that appeared to be a type of fossilized organic matter, and 2 that were energy matrix constructs requiring special viewer equipment, told a story about the breadth of the galaxy's history that no briefing document could contain. These were real things. Things that had been held by hands, or whatever approximate type of hands those civilizations had used, by beings who were trying to communicate across time to whoever came next. How long have you been coming here? Iona asked Maven Toth. 600 years, the elder counselor said. Since I was first appointed to the council. I have read every inscription hundreds of times.
She paused.
I never expected to have a subject of the warnings standing beside me. Iona looked at her. Is it strange? Iona asked. Having us here? Maven Toth was quiet for a moment. It is Doravash, she said. In the fullest sense. The moment when the decision reveals its own depth. She paused. For most of my time in this hall, the warnings were history. Evidence of past errors. Things to be understood and avoided. She looked around the hall. Now they are active. Current. The subject of the warnings exists and is not a threat in this room and is asking me questions about the slab, and I am answering them.
She paused.
It is the strangest thing I have experienced in 600 years. And I do not mean strange as a negative assessment. Iona nodded. She walked to the neutronite slab. Up close, it was more textured than the scan images had suggested. The surface had a kind of depth to it, like looking into still water. The inscription sitting on the visible layer but something else moving beneath it. May I touch it? She asked. The inscription surface has been touched by many hands, Maven Toth said. Mine among them. Iona placed her palm on the slab. The coolness of it surprised her. Neutronite was a dense material, and she had expected it to be closer to room temperature, but it was cold. Not unpleasantly cold, but distinctly, persistently cold, the way very old stone is cold, as if the temperature were coming from a deeper layer of time than the room could warm. She felt the carved grooves under her fingers. I am not reading them. I am just feeling their physical presence. Someone had made these. Someone had held something sharp and pressed it into this material and made marks with their body, specifically because they wanted the marks to persist. I wanted the marks to remain after everything else was gone. She thought about her daughter, running approach vectors on a personal tablet in a survey ship 300 million kilometers from home. She thought about the asteroid she had named after Sarah without filing the paperwork. She thought about her husband, who had believed in things with his whole body. She pressed her palm flat against the slab and said, quietly, to whoever had made it, "We found your warning. We read it. We're trying." She didn't know if that was a satisfying thing for the warning writer to hear, wherever they were or weren't. She didn't know if they had imagined this exact moment, their message received, not in the way they'd feared it would need to be received, but received by the very species they'd been warning about. She thought they probably hadn't imagined it, but she thought they might have hoped for it. She stepped back from the slab and looked at Maven Toth. The molecular layer, she said, returning to science, which was where she lived and where she did her best work. I want to understand the encoding technique before I attempt analysis. Can you walk me through everything your team found when they first identified it? Of course, Maven Toth said. And then, Iona said, I'm going to need some equipment brought in. I made a list. She pulled out a data pad. I know some of it is unusual. Some of it doesn't appear in your standard materials catalogs, but I've confirmed it's available through. Maven Toth took the list. Looked at it. Looked at Iona. You made this list before you left Earth, she said. Yes. Before you knew it, you would be allowed into the hall. Iona paused. I made a list based on the assumption that the request would be approved. I would rather not waste time when I arrived. Maven Toth looked at the list for a moment longer. Door of Ash, she said softly. Not as a translation. Just as itself. The word was in her own language, for what it meant. Iona looked at her. What does that mean? It means, Maven Toth paused. It means now I understand what I was looking at all along. It took Iona 4 months. This was quicker than she thought it would be, because the encoding technique was based on a concept she remembered from a different area, low-frequency resonance mapping, which she had learned about 20 years ago in a context unrelated to data storage. This knowledge helped her understand the molecular patterns in the neutronite. She did not tell anyone this for the first 3 months, because she needed to be certain, and being certain meant running the analysis 67 times in 67 different parameter configurations, and only when 59 of the 67 returned the same foundational structure did she feel confident enough to bring Maven Toth in. The Elder Counselor came to the analysis room alone. This was Iona's request. She wanted the first reading to be small. Just 2 people if that was acceptable. It was acceptable. Iona pulled up the decoded text on the room's display system. She had rendered it in both Velshera script and the human translation simultaneously, because she had designed the decoding framework to output both, and she thought both sets of eyes mattered. I'll tell you before you read it, she said, that it is not what I expected. Maven Toth looked at the text. Nor what I expected, she said after a moment. The secondary layer of the neutronite slab, the molecularly encoded message left by a civilization with no name and no survivors, was not a warning. It was a map. Not of space. Not of star systems or transit corridors or planetary positions. The map depicted something that lacked a physical location. Something that could not be found by flying to a specific set of coordinates. The text, translated to the best of Iona's analytical ability, read, We are the ones who struck them and survived long enough to regret it. Not because they could not destroy us. They could, and eventually they did, by removing themselves from conflict and allowing us to collapse under the weight of what we had done, which is worse because it meant we had to look at ourselves clearly. We did not fall to their weapons. We fell victim to their patience, which made us feel small. We fell to their memory, which made us accountable. In the end, we came to understand what we had done, but it was too late. We write this secondary layer for them. For the ones who will survive. For the ones who will one day be in the room with another species who did what we did, and will have to decide what to do with a moment that history says they should use differently than we did. The map is this. They can hold 2 things simultaneously. They can hold the record of what was done and the choice not to use it. They can hold both the injury and the willingness to let something new grow in the same space. Such an act is not forgiveness in the simple sense. It is not the erasure of the record. The record stays. It stays in them the way everything stays in them. Permanently, precisely, fully. However, the record and the response to it are not the same thing. They have never been the same thing. If you are reading this and you are not them, if you are one of us, one of the ones who struck without understanding, know this. They will choose. They will choose what to do with the record. And the choosing is entirely theirs. Improving yourself doesn't influence it because better than you were is not the same as having never been what you were. But you can be present for the choice. You can witness it. You can be in the room when they decide, and that being present, honest, and seen by them while they decide is the only thing we ever found that mattered. We could not offer them back what we took. We could only be there when they chose what to do about it. We were there. We hope it was something. The room was very quiet. Iona realized she had tears on her face, and was somewhat surprised by this, because she was not a crier professionally or otherwise, but apparently some things bypass the professional entirely and go directly to something underneath. Maven Toth was sitting very still in the Velshera way that Iona had learned. Over 4 months of working together meant deep processing rather than absence. After a long time, Maven Toth said, They were in the room. Yes, Iona said. Whoever wrote this, they went back. After everything. They went back, and they were present for the choosing. Yes. And they encoded this message specifically for... Maven Toth paused. For us. For whoever was next in their position. For whoever came after. Iona said. Whoever found themselves having done what they did and needing to know what to do next. Maven Toth was quiet again. I have read the visible inscription 400 times, she said finally. I thought it was the whole message. Most maps have more layers than the top one, Iona said. A pause. The last line. Maven Toth said. We hope it was something. They did not know. She was very still. They went back, and they were present, and they never knew whether it made a difference. No, Iona said. They didn't. And they wrote it anyway. Yes. Maven Toth looked at Iona. Do you think it made a difference? She asked. Their being present. For the choosing.
Iona thought about this.
She thought about a civilization that had done a terrible thing and then, instead of defending it or retreating from it or rationalizing it away, went back. Had been present. Had witnessed the consequences of themselves. Had encoded, in the deepest layer of the most durable material they knew, a message not for history, but for whoever was next. I think, Iona said carefully, that the fact that their civilization ended, that it didn't prevent their ending, and they still went back, and they were still present, and they still wrote the message. She paused.
Yes.
I think that was something. I think that might be the most important kind of something there is. Maven Toth was quiet for a long time. Then she said, in her own language, a word that the translation system rendered not as a single word but as a phrase. The kind of act that matters not because of what it produces, but because of what it demonstrates about the thing that performed it. And Iona thought, yes, that's exactly it. That's the whole thing. 6 years after the Phobos strike, Sarah Voss was back in deep space. Not hiding. Not on assignment. Just back in deep space because deep space was where she thought most clearly, and she had things to think about. Diego was with her because Diego was always with her, and because he had apparently decided at some point in their 6-year partnership that wherever Sarah went, the navigation was his problem, and she had never explicitly agreed to this arrangement, but had also never argued against it, which was functionally the same thing. The Treaty of Velshar, officially the framework for civilizational coexistence between the Velshara Accord and the Terran Compact, which Sarah privately thought was the most administratively titled document in galactic history, had been in effect for 4 years. It was imperfect. It had 6 outstanding disputes under active mediation. 2 of those disputes involved her directly, in her current role as Terran Compact Liaison to the Outer Rim Monitoring Division, which was a title she had accepted with the specific understanding that it did not require her to stay on Earth. The treaty was also, by every available measure, holding. Not because the Velshara and humanity had resolved all their differences. Not because the power asymmetry had disappeared, or the memory of the Phobos strike had faded, or the archive in the Hall of Recorded Catastrophes had been emptied. It was holding because 2 individuals, a 600-year-old counselor and a cartographer's daughter, had sat in a small room and had a real conversation, and something real had been built from it, and real things, Sarah had found, were harder to dismantle than the alternatives. She was not on assignment currently. She was on personal time, the first personal time she had taken in 4 years, and she was in the outer system of a red dwarf approximately 200 light-years from Earth, performing a survey she had specifically requested approval to conduct. It was the system where the brown dwarf had been. The unremarkable one. The one she had been mapping when the Phobos news arrived. She had filed it incomplete, obviously, given the circumstances, and had been meaning to return to it. So she returned to it. Diego ran the scans with the same professional efficiency he always applied to everything, and the data came back with the same result it had probably always been going to come back with, which was nothing particularly remarkable. A brown dwarf doing what brown dwarfs do, which is radiate a modest amount of energy in a system with no habitable planets and no apparent commercial value, and no cartographic significance beyond the basic fact of its existence. Sarah looked at the data for a long time. Then she filed the naming paperwork. "What are you naming it?" Diego asked, not looking up from the navigation console. "Doravash," Sarah said. Diego looked up. "The moment when the flaw in a decision becomes visible from inside the decision," she said. "That's the rough translation."
She paused.
Also apparently used as a compliment. For something that reveals its own nature all at once. Diego looked at the brown dwarf on the long-range scanner. A dim, cold smudge of light against the darker dark. It's a good name for it, he said. It tried to be a star and didn't make it, Sarah said. But it's still something. It still puts out light. Not star-level light, but light. She paused. It still found a way to matter. Diego was quiet for a moment. Is this the part where I say something philosophical? He asked. Only if you'd like to. A pause. I want to note, for the record, that we have come a very long way from passively scanning a brown dwarf as part of a routine mapping run that everyone at the cartography division agreed was about as exciting as watching paint dry. We have, Sarah agreed. I also want to note that your mother decoded a 12,000-year-old alien message using resonance mapping principles she learned from an unrelated project 20 years ago, and that this is the most Iona Voss thing that has ever happened, and I would like it acknowledged. Acknowledged. And I want to note that Maven Toth sent you a personal comm last week that you haven't answered yet. Sarah looked at him. I know, she said. She's 600 years old, Diego said. She's not going to be offended, but I thought it was worth noting. Sarah pulled up the comm on her personal tablet. She had read it several times. It was short. Maven Totha's personal communications tended to be brief, which Sarah had found initially surprising and then entirely consistent with the specific quality of someone who had 600 years of things to say and had long since learned to say only the most necessary ones. The message read, I have been thinking about something you said in our first private meeting. You said, we are terrible at letting go. I have been thinking about your statement not as a description of your species, but as a description of something true about what it means to be built from memory. We Velshera do not have a word for regret. I have been considering for 6 years whether its absence is a lack. I believe it is. Not because regret is comfortable, it is not, but because regret is the thing that makes you go back. It is the mechanism of return. You have taught me several things in 6 years. The most useful one is this. Being bad at letting go is different from being unable to move forward. You can carry something and still walk. You can carry something and still arrive somewhere new. I am trying to learn this. At 600 years old. I thought you should know. Sarah looked at the message for a long time. Then she typed back. I know. You are better at it than you think. The fact that you went looking for the thing you didn't understand, the inside of it before the situation forced you to, that is the thing. Most beings wait to be forced. You came looking. That is the beginning of everything. Also, the neutronite slab secondary layer, the last line. We hope it was something.
It was.
I think it was a very specific kind of something. I think the civilization that wrote it, if they could know that it was read by you in that room, on a day when something real was decided, I think they would have considered that the best possible outcome. They made a map. You followed it. That's what maps are for.
She sent it.
Then she put down the tablet and looked out at the stars, one at a time, the way she always did. Diego watched her for a moment and then went back to the navigation, and he found, on this particular transit run, that he was glad to be here. Ready to head home? He asked. Sarah looked at Doravash on the scanner. The small, cold, persistent light of a thing that had tried to be a star and hadn't quite made it and was still, in its own quiet way, shining. One more pass, she said. I want to make sure the map is complete. Diego ran the numbers. One more pass, he agreed. Outside, the brown dwarf did what it had always done and would go on doing long after everyone in the ship was gone. It held its position. It emitted its modest light. It continued existing in a universe that mostly didn't notice it, and it didn't need the universe to notice. It just needed to be there. Some things are like that. Some things matter not because of what they produce, but because of what they demonstrate about the kind of thing that persists. Sarah Voss, cartographer, liaison, daughter of a woman who named things, daughter of a man who believed in things with his whole body, she ran her final pass over Doravash and logged every reading and filed the complete map with Earth's Outer Rim Cartography Division, where it would sit in the database alongside thousands of other quiet, unremarkable, carefully documented places that had no strategic value and no commercial interest and no particular story, except that someone had gone there and paid attention and made sure the information survived. And in the Hall of Recorded Catastrophes on the third moon of Velshar Prime, the neutronite slab sat in its case, with its two layers, the visible warning and the hidden map, and in the small annotation file that Iona Voss had attached to the archive record when she submitted her decoding work, there was a note that read, "To whoever finds this record in the future, the secondary layer of warning inscription number 1 is not visible due to the damage. 1 has been decoded. It is not ultimately a warning. It is a record of something hopeful, a civilization that did a terrible thing and then chose to be present for the consequence of it, without knowing what the consequence would be. They didn't grow to know whether it mattered."
We know. It mattered.
Please attach this note to the file, so that if someone reads the archive 1,000 years from now and wonders, they will know. They went back. They were there. It was something. Dr. Iona Voss, Terran Compact Outer Rim Research Division. In the lower corner of that note, someone had added a smaller notation, which was technically outside the filing format but accepted by the archive system because the format was flexible enough to accommodate addenda in different handwriting. She always files the paperwork eventually. SV. The end.